Well, guys, it's here. The final season of Voltron is live on Netflix, and I have now watched it. And boy, do I not know how to feel about this one. Like, the season wasn't entirely negative or anything, and it's not as if I think the show was bad, like, overall was bad. After having watched the season, I still think that overall this was a good show. But, like, I don't know what I was expecting from the final season of Voltron. But this wasn't it. I think that my biggest problem with this season was that everything felt super compressed. The season had two different climaxes, one at roughly the middle of the season and then another one at the end, which leads me to believe that even though they knew ahead of time that this was going to be a full season, not a half season, they still wrote it like two half seasons. Like, the only other thing that I can think of that might explain why the story of this season went the way that it did is if it was supposed to be 2 seasons, and then they were told that they were only going to get 1 season to tell 2 seasons worth of stories. And I don't mean 2 half seasons, I mean 2 full seasons. That originally they thought that the story of this season was going to be able to be told in 2 full-length seasons. Because nothing is explained here. Nothing at all. Things just kind of happen all throughout this season, and not a single one of them is explained ever by anyone, with some very minor and not very noteworthy exceptions. It was a fantastic season to look at. Everything from the visuals to the action was so much better than what we've gotten in past seasons that alone kept me enthralled throughout the entire thing. And at the start of the season, when they were taking things slow and letting things unfold at a more natural pace, they did seem to be at least trying to address some of the issues that I had brought up about the story in my previous reviews. We do learn that after the death of Lotor, during the time that Voltron was, I guess, outside of time before they returned to our universe, the Galra Empire was in such turmoil that they weren't really able to make much progress. And we learn that even though some of the allies that Voltron made through Lotor and through his push for a more peaceful Galra Empire, while those people felt betrayed when Voltron disappeared, they were still willing to listen to Voltron and rejoin the Voltron coalition after the fact. And it kind of looked like that's what the season was going to be about, leading up to a final confrontation with Hagar, but then everything just goes off the rails and they end up confronting Hagar at the midpoint of the season. Like, yeah, I know her name's not actually Hagar, she's going by her Altean name again now, but I don't remember what it is, so she's still Hagar to me. They confront Hagar at the midpoint of the season, and it's a spectacular episode. Like, visually speaking, it's stunning. The action is great, but she effectively defeats them, and I'm not really sure how she did that. Like, apparently her entire plan hinges on seizing control of the Pyramid Temple on the planet where Allura did her alchemy trials from 2 seasons ago. A planet where you're not even supposed to be able to set foot at the temple there if you're not worthy, and I just can't imagine that Hagar, as she is now, even if she was worthy at one point, I can't imagine that she's worthy now. So how did she get there to use the pyramid's power to do all the additional stuff that she did, not limited to, but including killing the Guardian, the supposedly all-powerful Guardian that was protecting the place, absorbing its power into either herself or into the pyramid? That's not really made clear either. And then she somehow knew, for no adequately explained reason, that by doing this she could turn the Pyramid Temple into a ship, which she could fly around like the castle ship. Like, this show has always been more fantasy than it's been science fiction, and Altean alchemy has always been kind of whatever we want to happen can happen, but this was pushing things beyond the boundaries of my suspension of disbelief just a little too much. It was cool to watch, but I didn't like what I was seeing, because I didn't like that it didn't seem to be growing organically from any of the stuff that we had learned prior, like so many of the other magical elements of this show have in the past. But then we do learn stuff that was really satisfying, like we learn how Hagar managed to convince the Altean survivors, the ones from Lotor's colonies, to side with her and turn them against Voltron. It was all really well written and really well handled, and you can understand why these people would be so zealously devoted to Hagar at this point, and you can also understand why some of them don't quite buy entirely into what Hagar said once they saw how she was actually carrying herself in the fight against Voltron. And we do get to see how the Paladins and how the crew of the Atlas are able to learn how to more effectively fight against the Altean mechs that almost defeated both of them 1-on-2 at the end of last season, and even fight multiples of them at a time and be relatively successful. That was all really satisfying. It showed growth in the characters and their skills. But in defeating so many of these mechs, now they have all these Alteans on the ship, and they're hardly even characters. We don't get to know any but just one of them, and I'm not even sure if he was alive by the end, because some scenes made it seem like he had died, and yet other scenes seemed to show that he was still alive. I didn't really get that. And it's through them that we learn that a large part of Hagar's power comes from a dark entity that she took into herself when she was trying to break into the Quintessence field back before she and Zarkon turned evil. And that apparently it wasn't overexposure to raw Quintessence which transformed them. It was exposure to this entity, and everyone knew about it. But I don't recall any mention of this thing anywhere in previous episodes. I thought it was just overexposure to raw Quintessence which changed them, and that was supposed to explain why Lotor, when he entered the Quintessence field, started to get all aggressive, and Allura, once she and the other Paladins entered the Quintessence field, started to get so aggressive. I thought that those things were connected, but now they're not, because neither one of them was exposed to this dark entity when they entered the Quintessence field. Only Zarkon and Hagar were. And I guess they introduced the concept of this dark entity to explain why Zarkon turned evil, but they already had an explanation for that. A literal power corrupts story. You didn't need to add this extra element, except that the existence of this extra element did allow Allura to find Hagar's location later and enter Hagar's mind to try to defeat her by entering her mind later. But they could have done that with any number of other things, just a regular Altean alchemy spell that Allura recalled from her past or managed to work out from herself. You didn't need this extra element that came out of nowhere and retconned the lore in what I feel was a negative way. There was kind of on the fighter pilots, who of course came with them on the Atlas because it's a carrier ship primarily. I don't even remember the characters' names after the episode, so obviously the focus wasn't on them enough. And it was kind of cute because there's like, the whole premise is that one of the fighter pilots, he likes to record documentary style stuff with his camera, and so everything is from the point of view of the camera throughout the entire episode. And there's like one scene where Pidge's family dog is carrying the camera around and is just really adorable, and there was some good dialogue in there and like a little bit of insight into some of the characters, but it wasn't stuff that we wouldn't have already worked out for ourselves at this point. And despite the fact that there was some really good visual stuff in the episode, the cuteness with the dog, a giant monster fight that we got to see through like a found footage kind of lens that was really cool. Once I was done watching the episode, I just felt like I'd wasted time. The show had wasted my time with it. And there was another episode later where they go to a planet to celebrate Clear Day without wrecking it this time. And like, nothing went wrong the entire time, subverting expectations quite a lot. And it was nice to see the characters get a little bit downtime and actually enjoy themselves for a while. And it was nice to see that they could enjoy themselves amidst all of this danger and all the seriousness happening around them. But again, I felt like the episode was just a waste of time, because while it was cool to see the characters happy, we didn't learn anything about them in the episode. And we definitely needed to be getting more character development this season. I didn't feel like the characters developed at all this season, with the exception of Lance and Allura's relationship, which got one episode, and then suddenly they're the most devoted of couples ever. And I've said before, at least I believe I've said before, I don't mind the idea of them being a couple. I just felt like it had to be done well. And while later on, if you overlook the fact that the formation of their relationship was kind of rushed, it was handled pretty well, but the formation of their relationship was still kind of rushed, and I didn't like it. I guess to phrase it differently, I feel like they work alright as a couple. I just don't feel like the relationship was set up as well as it needed to be. After that, they tried to give us character development for Allura, but it never really sticks, and then suddenly her characterization is just completely different by the end, which was a complete and utter mess. Spoiler warning, I'm about to spoil the crap out of the end of the final season of this show, so if you don't want spoilers, just cut out of the video here. I will leave you with this. I thought that this season was a lot of fun to watch, but overall, I'm not entirely sure that I enjoyed it or not, and I feel that you should be a little wary when going to watch it yourself. Just keep that in mind and try your best to assess it on your own. That said, the final climax to this season was just dumb. I don't really know how else to explain it. It made so little sense, even within the lore of this universe, that I was left dumbfounded the entire time that I was watching it. We find out that Hagar's entire plan is to recover Lotor's mech, even though originally it was to recover Lotor himself, and supposedly he's supposed to be in the mech when she first recovers it, but then later on, suddenly he's not anymore. He was never in the mech to begin with, I guess. I don't really understand it. Like, she flat out says at one point that she's controlling her son, who is controlling the mech. But then later on, it's specifically stated that she wanted just the mech for its ability to pierce between realities. And it's shown that she's using her powers to control the mech directly. She's not interfacing with any pilot at all, let alone Lotor himself. That Lotor is actually dead. So right there, even within this season, they retconned that much. But that doesn't really matter. Point is, she wanted Lotor's mech for its ability to pierce between realities. Her goal is to find a reality where she has died, but Zarkon is still good, and Lotor is still a child, so that she can transplant herself into that reality and take on the role that she was never able to fulfill because she and Zarkon turned evil. That she wants to regain her family and live as part of her family in a peaceful environment. And it's pretty interesting, because also, minor spoilers for Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, that's literally Kingpin's villain plan from Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Like, it's exactly the same thing, just without giant robots, and I literally just saw Into the Spider-Verse, so I thought that was kind of funny. And we know that traveling between realities can be dangerous, so of course Team Voltron wants to stop her from doing this because it could cause damage, but then suddenly doing this will definitely cause so much damage that it destroys our reality, the reality that she ends up in, and all realities in between them, even though the concept of realities being in between each other is kind of ludicrous to begin with. And then the destruction of those in-between realities is portrayed as reality literally shrinking in on itself into realities, which I thought was the quintessence field, but it turns out it's not. It's this place with a big glowy orb in the center in which all of the realities spawn out of it like tendrils, like literal strands of light that you can interact with, and if you cut them, that reality is instantly destroyed. And this isn't like some spell that Hagar cast to allow her to perceive the universe this way so that she could interact with it this way. This is just a literal place that exists, and it makes no sense at all. But it makes even less sense that after Hagar and Team Voltron reach the center of this place, which is apparently within flying distance, despite the fact that this should be the size of the entire universe, they are able to stand on the orb of light in the middle like it's a planet and interact with each other. But then, like, dead people are also able to be there, and if Allura and Hagar sacrifice themselves to this magic orb of light, they can recreate all the universes that were destroyed and also repair the damage to the universes that still exist but that Hagar damaged them. I don't understand any of this. None of this makes any sense, and what makes even less sense is that Allura apparently is able to convince Hagar to do this with her by reminding her that there's good in everyone, and therefore reminding her that there's still good in her and that she should do the good thing. But Hagar up to this point has thought that she was doing the good thing, trying to get her family back. And yeah, walking into the light at the end there does reunite Hagar with Zarkon and Lotor because they're both dead, and this is apparently heaven now, I guess. But she didn't specifically want those people back. She wanted the family that she never got to have back, and they're not precisely it. So wouldn't she have tried to hijack this process and recreate herself and her family as she wanted them to be in the universe in which the show primarily takes place. Like, we see that they can make changes to these universes when they're recreating them because they're able to recreate Altea. So why didn't Hagar try to recreate Zarkon and Lotor and herself the way that she wanted them to exist? Why did she just leave them dead? And more importantly, why did this show end with Allura also being dead? In order to do this, she apparently had to stay in this place, effectively walking into the light and dying. Like, that was clearly the metaphor that they were going here, but why couldn't she just recreate herself in the universe in which the show takes place when she recreated Altea? It just doesn't make sense that at the end of the show, despite the fact that she ended this show with the effective powers of a god, the power to create and destroy universes at will, that she couldn't put herself back into the reality in which the show primarily takes place and reunite with her friends. It doesn't make sense that she had to stay dead. The sacrifice that she made, like, sure, I believe that she would make a sacrifice like that, but it doesn't make sense to me that it had to be a sacrifice. And I also don't understand where her character was supposed to have grown to the point that she believes there's good in everyone, because she certainly didn't at the beginning of this season, and we never saw her develop to that point, ever. It's like she just suddenly decided that that's what she believes. Like, I know I've been saying this a lot, and it's probably getting annoying, but it doesn't make sense. There was one arc this season in which I could have seen her reaching that point. While they're in Hagar's mind, they discover that Hagar has apparently captured the souls of Zarkon and the other original paladins, and so they're able to fight them and free them from the evil controlling them and redeem them. Like, all of them, including Zarkon, and Allura is able to interact with her father. It was all very touching, and I could see throughout that arc of the show her coming to this realization that there's still good in everyone, specifically when they were able to redeem Zarkon. But if that's what happened, her characterization didn't change at all to reflect that until that moment in the finale. And then there's the way that the show specifically ended. It ended with the remaining principal cast of characters coming together to have a party beneath Allura's giant-ass statue on Altea and remembering her, and it was very touching. And then they take a group photo together, and that group photo changes into another group photo taken in the same place on the same day several years later, where it shows how much they've grown and changed. But then it jumps into quick little snapshot epilogues, and I hate those. I hate them a lot, because I feel like the story had already given us a pretty good indication of where all the characters were going to end up anyway, so I don't feel like we needed the epilogue panels in the first place. But, like, I'm the kind of person who likes to imagine what might happen to these characters after the series is over, and if I'm given an epilogue, I can't do that anymore. It just frustrates me. It's a personal pet peeve, but it does frustrate me. And if we had gotten any really relevant insights into the characters and their personalities in these little snapshot epilogues, it would have been one thing, but we didn't. We were just told again where they were heading in their lives after the series was over, but we'd already gotten that in the final episode, so it wasn't necessary. Like, I'm glad that Hunk managed to use his cooking skills to unite species throughout the universe. I'm glad that Keith managed to transform the Blade of Malmora into a peacekeeping organization. I'm even glad that Shiro got a happy ending with a guy who he never talked to on screen once. Like, I don't even think he was a character. I think he's just someone they made up for this one still image. But I just don't feel like this particular part of the episode was necessary, and I do feel like it was awkward enough that it took away from the show as a whole. And I guess that's a good way to describe my feelings on this season overall. Like, I don't feel like the season overall was a waste of time, because there was a lot of good here. I want to reiterate that. There was a lot of good here. Episodes which actually hit what they were trying to hit were really good, and the action and the visuals were fantastic. But then there were all these moments throughout that just kind of retroactively soured the good stuff that came before them. It's just such an odd kind of mixed bag, because the highs are so high and the lows are just barely not low enough to ruin them. I do think that if you like this show at all, you should still watch this season. Like, you shouldn't just abandon the show because this season is so uneven and ends on what I think is a pretty crappy note. But want you to keep all of this in mind when you do go to watch it. Otherwise, if you have seen the final season of Voltron Legendary Defender, let me know what you think of it. I'm probably more interested to know people's opinions on this than anything else that I've reviewed recently. Let's get a discussion going in the comments section down below, or over on my Discord, link in the description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.